Here is a really good question. Speaking about the United States of America, Ellen White wrote that Republicanism and Protestantism became the fundamental principles of the United States. These principles are the secret of its what? Of its power and prosperity. The United States has risen to a place among the most powerful nations of the earth. We are told today that any type of unification of church and state is satanic and evil and will provoke the curse of God. But if that is true, then how? How was it possible for the United States to be guided by Protestantism and be blessed beyond any other nation? Why would Ellen White speak approvingly of a nation built on Protestant principles if, as we hear today, religious principles in government are anathema to religious liberty? These are very important, very good questions. Over the last 30 plus years, Adventist leadership, especially in North America and the GC, have told us that killing children by abortion is a religious freedom and that any effort to oppose this will be a theocracy or will lead to a dreaded theocracy where religion would become a fundamental principle of government and therefore very bad and will lead to our destruction. Yet our very own prophet, Ellen White, herself said the nation was already built on Protestant principles. And yet, rather than issue contempt and scorn or woe and damnation, she said the exact opposite. But how can that be? As documented in other videos, many of the Adventist pioneers openly supported anti-abortion legislation. The official Advent Review and Herald was used to publicly promote and celebrate the efforts of the American Medical Association to make abortion illegal. But this causes a huge problem because if it's true, as we hear today, that opposing abortion will lead to a dreaded theocracy deserving of God's wrath, then why didn't Ellen White warn anyone about this? She was surrounded by people openly and publicly calling for abortion to be illegal. She was surrounded by people calling for what is now defined as a horrible theocracy, and yet there's not a single word of warning from her. Why is that? Here's another example. She writes, "The Lord has done more for the United States than for any other country upon which the sun shines." Again, if religious principles in government are a terrible travesty that provokes the wrath of God, then why would he do so much for a nation founded upon Protestant principles? Our Adventist leadership, especially over the last 30, 40 years, have followed lockstep with the mainstream media and perverted Christian liberalism and have taken the word theocracy and they have taken this word and stretched it out so big to mean that even opposing the murder of children is supporting a theocracy. But stop and think about it. This is completely absurd for many reasons, the most obvious being that if the government does not have the legitimate authority and duty to protect life, then there is no purpose of government, since all other rights are predicated upon the right to life. In a previous video, I demonstrated that the Adventist claim of a, quote, secular government, which we hear primarily, again, from North Americans and the GC, is a complete myth. Because all legislation and all policies and every law is moral by nature and derives from a moral framework. You can't take a position on what is right or what is wrong in a vacuum. Somebody somewhere has to decide on what is acceptable or unacceptable for civil society. And that moral framework derives from one's theological or ideological understanding of reality and truth, of right or wrong. The Adventist claim of a secular government is a complete myth because in order to regulate civil society, every government has to impose law, and those laws will be based on some religious principle, whether it be Protestantism or Catholicism or Islam or Jewish Zionism, etc. So if we are going to take the word theocracy and stretch it out so big as we are currently doing, the question is not whether we will have a theocracy, but what type of theocracy. Out of their own mouth, by their own words, If telling people how to live and what not to do is theocratic, then by their own definition, we currently live in a theocracy right now, this very moment. So the people spreading fear porn of a theocracy are in a completely absurd position because think about it. The only alternative is complete anarchy. Again, if the blind guides in the Adventist church want to use their magical dictionaries to keep changing definitions and to stretch out the definition for the word theocracy to include regulation of civil society and protecting life, well, okay, fine. Then even by their own words and by their own definition, we live in a theocracy right now. And the only alternative is complete anarchy. In a historical sense, the word theocracy referred in a very limited way to a government that compelled people, especially in matters of religion and worship. And that is exactly the type of theocracy that the Bible warns against. But today, the definition has become so big and so distorted as to encompass even matters of civil society. So, by the very definition of the false prophets in our Adventist church today, we must therefore support a theocracy or complete anarchy. Those are the only two options. And notice carefully, there will, of course, doubtless be people who will be upset by this video and claim that it is completely insane for a Seventh-day Adventist to promote a theocracy. But I'm not the one who came up with these insane definitions. They said it, not me. However, notice that the people who are upset will be stuck. They're going to be stuck because if they want to disagree, then they have to demonstrate that the government has no authority to regulate civil society, which they can't do. This meme right here presents very well their dilemma. If they want to disagree, then they have to abandon their absurd, unbiblical definition, which of course they won't do, because if they do so, they would have to admit that the government does, in fact, have the legitimate authority and duty to protect the right to life, something they won't admit because the church has publicly opposed this for many decades now. If, however, they want to keep their absurd definition, then they look insane for leaving anarchy as the only remaining option. So, in summary, if we are all supposed to just go along with this lunacy, then the question is not whether Adventists should support a theocracy, but what type of theocracy. Thanks for watching.